welcome back to the show, Decoding Careers. As you're probably all aware now, on a mission to help engineers transition from an engineer to a leader. Had a really interesting guest on the show a few weeks ago, which will be live soon. But got a really interesting leader opposite me today, Jacob Richter, the CTO at Propeller. Really looking forward to this one. Maybe jump in and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the business that you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently at a company called Propeller Aero, so I'm their CTO. So essentially, what does that mean? What does CTO mean? It means 10,000 things at 10,000 different companies. For me at Propeller, I head up our product and engineering team, is kind of like the department that I lead. That is made up of essentially all of our product teams, so our product managers, product researchers, those bits and pieces. Our engineering team as a whole, so that includes everything: engineering managers, engineers, testers, QA, all those bits and pieces, as well as the design team. So I'm fortunate to have a head of design that runs that team, but overall it's kind of aligning all those teams to make sure that we're building the best thing that we can and managing quite a number of essentially the leaders across that team, working very closely with the CEO and stuff like that. So what does Propeller do? Essentially, in a nutshell, it helps we build smart survey technologies. So that's a broad term, but it is genuinely what we do. That's everything from hardware solutions like high accuracy GPS hardware devices in field, all the way through to software solutions as well, that essentially empower our customers who are usually more in the surveying world to map, measure, and manage their work sites, right? So essentially, our philosophy is we bring all of the people on a work site. It doesn't matter if it's a quarry, if it's a mine, if it's a construction site, if it's any of those type of things, or even landfills like garbage tips, right? That's a big customer of ours. We bring all of those people on that site together on the map and collaborating together, right? So it's really important for these customers to know how they're tracking against progress, how they're tracking to design, are their diggers working in the right spot, and all those bits and pieces. So essentially, we build a platform that does all of that for them. And we do that for a lot of customers, right? So we're a global company now. At the company itself, we're quite fortunate. It has about 250 people in it, always growing, of course, scattered across the globe. Product and engineering is mostly in Sydney, but we do have a few members across the world. And essentially, we serve a really broad remit of customers, I would say in nearly every country, well, over 80 countries at least, like the big players, thousands of customers and thousands of companies, helping them essentially do the best that they can on their work sites.
So that'll be saving companies a fortune.
Saving companies a fortune, exactly. So really, where do we play in? What costs these kind of companies money? What costs these companies money is things like overwork. So let's say you've got a bulldozer and you're digging out a trench or something like that. It's relatively cheap to dig the trench, but what happens if you dig the trench too deep, right? At that point, you've already disposed of the dirt. You need to bring dirt back into the site. So you're kind of double costing everything, right? So for us, it's making sure that they're catching those type of overwork problems before they occur, right? Essentially getting final grades and things accurately. And more importantly, like, these are massive projects, right? You can imagine thousands of people, tens of thousands of people on these large construction sites. Project managing that and attributing resources to the right teams at the right times as the project continues. That's where companies use us to make sure they're kind of on track across these massive projects.
Yeah, and in a previous life, I was actually a consultant for a telco business.
Yep.
To help them grow the business.
Yeah, right.
So I've dealt with variations, etc.
That type of thing, exactly.
And I know how much that can cost construction companies, and it goes in the black hole where no one knows, and then the contractor passes it on to the contractor, and it just goes on to like a snowball effect. Is that something else?
Exactly. So we also handle, with what you just said, like, let's say dispute resolution, right? Yeah. Because sometimes people do too much work and they have to adjust contracts and things. We are also used for dispute resolution as essentially a single source of truth that is the real world, that people can say, no, you promised us this, but you got this, those type of things.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah. Really interesting business, great idea. And it looks like you guys are going well. You're going strong as well, which is good. Got a good brand in the market.
Yep.
From speaking to other engineers. and you're starting to do quite a lot more in the sort of meetup scene as well. So.
Correct. Yeah. So one of the main challenges for us is I like to call this like a bit of a dirtier business, because we're not clean software world that, the nirvana of software companies is building software for other software companies, right? That's kind of the nirvana. We're nowhere near that, right? Like what we deal in is garbage tips, bird shit covering tractors and our hardware devices and those type of things. And it's really hard for us to make an image of ourselves in this essentially clean Sydney market, right? Like most of the software here is much more on that pure software clean side. So we've started this meetup essentially to help get a little bit more information out about Propeller, and really to attract those people that are somewhere between hardware and software, that like the bits on the software side and the bolts on the kind of hardware-y side. And that's why we've made this group, to bring those people together.
Interesting. All right, brilliant. Now, maybe take us back. So maybe take us back to when you wrote your first line of code.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'd like to probably hear a bit more about that, and then maybe give us a brief sort of snapshot of your background from uni to sort of work.
To uni now. I think the first line of code is probably going to surprise you, right? I didn't write code until very late in my life, right? So I think I've listened to a few of the previous podcasts on here, for instance, and people are like, I wrote code when I was 6, I wrote code when I was 7. I was like, I'm not going to match that at all. I didn't write code until I was at university, right? I think the better question to ask, though, would be like, when I was growing up, I was always very computer literate, though, right? So even though I wasn't writing code, I can even think well back to when I was like 5, 6, 7, running kind of modified versions of Doom on computer from shell script and things like that, right? Like I was in the weeds of a computer without programming. So essentially when I joined university, I did a Bachelor of Advanced Science in Physics and Applied Math, and a core component of those degrees is doing modeling programming, right? So whether that's in quantum mechanics or astronomy or anything like that, you have to be able to program these systems. The programming, though, is more on the MATLAB side, so not building web services and things like that. So I would say it wasn't until my first year of university that I actually seriously wrote code.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
it's different answer.
Different answer. Yeah.
Good.
Different answer. And then I didn't really pursue code at university either. So physics is more mathematics based. There is a small element of computer programming, but so beyond, let's say, the Java 101 that I did as an elective course in the first year, I didn't really pick it up until I was starting to do research projects for physics. At that point, I was doing theoretical astronomy, which is like, instead of going out and looking through telescopes, you try and simulate that on computers. That had an element of programming in it. And when I moved into more research-heavy projects in like honours years and things like that, that was more becoming my full-time job, let's say. But again, it's not programming in the building a business sense, it's programming in the science sense, two very different worlds. So during those kind of final years at university, when I was delving in this, I could see where the limits of those type of programming styles kind of stopped, and I was keen to get into deeper programming, which then essentially was one of the reasons which pushed me into startup world.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
And I looked obviously through your career and how you've progressed through the ranks.
Yeah.
Obviously, I want to jump straight to Propeller because obviously it's a really, really great business that you're a part of, from what I've heard. But the fact that you've been in the space of 4 years, you started as a software engineer, transitioned to a head of engineering, and then to a CTO.
Yeah.
Like, maybe talk us a bit through, like, how did that happen so quickly from coming as a software engineer to where you are now?
Yeah. So as you said, I've only really been at Propeller for 4 years now. 4 years next month, I think, actually April. Now, before Propeller, so from university to Propeller, I said, moved into startup world. I've co-founded several startups across that period, right? Some of them are still quite successful and still going. Some of them, what you usually find with startups, 1 in 10 survive, and that's pretty much my case. So across that time, I've had many chances to build teams, grow my leadership qualities, figure out how to grow a business and learn all those lessons. So what it meant was when I joined Propeller at the start of COVID, the previous startup I was in kind of went down during COVID due to a variety of reasons. And fortuitously, Propeller was hiring quite large at that time. They just, if by chance or, huge coincidence, they raised a capital round just before going into COVID, which was great because after COVID hit, it was very hard to raise capital.
Good timing.
So perfect timing, great timing. Yeah, a bit of dark magic there. So they did that, and they hired up a lot of this talent, more senior talent in the Sydney market, as a result of all these companies going out of business as COVID started to hit. So I joined the team there as an engineer across a number of teams, and it was the most that Propeller had grown. So before that time, they'd hired a little bit, but it was much more trickle hiring. So this was kind of the first time where they, let's say, grew beyond the 20 engineers or 20 product and engineering people in the team. And then when I joined the company, it was quite clear that, don't get me wrong, the engineers on the team were great engineers, and they're still, most of them are still there, really high quality, understand the business, but they were thinking very siloed, for lack of a better word, right? And that's kind of what you have is, as your startups grow up to that level, your classic is your best engineers essentially become engineering managers, even though they don't want to become engineering managers, and maybe they're not cut out for it, right? And it kind of pushes people into that domain. There's maybe some long-term friction between people just as a result of, when I joined Propeller, it was already 6 years old, for instance, right? So it had already been around for quite a long time. And then me joining that, looking at the team, I could see quite a lot of opportunity to improve everything about Propeller, right? Whether that was the coding quality, the product direction, the structure, all those type of things, and ultimately to benefit making the product better. And I wasn't pinning for anything, right? It's not like I was joined Propeller to advance. It was just that when I was there, I was like, oh, I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm going to put my effort behind improving all these things as an engineer, right? I was just an engineer at that point, and then kind of as a result of that is how I moved through those. Eventually became head of engineering.
All right, and what were the biggest challenges for you making that transition from software engineer to head of engineering?
Yeah, it's probably there's two challenges. So the biggest challenge is anybody. Yeah, let's not. I won't even talk about head of engineering, but let's say from an engineer to a manager, right? Engineer to a manager. Engineer, it's really, you get a lot of reward from your work, for lack of a better word, right? You know what you're working on, you're punching out those tickets, you're shipping code. It's very easy for you to get job satisfaction, right? Job satisfaction, you know you're making an impact. Obviously, when you move into that manager domain, managing a number of people or a number of people, right? As it scales out, it's really hard. Essentially, your dopamine hits become fewer, right? Because if you're coaching or mentoring someone to make them the best, you can't do that overnight. So it's just a different way of thinking about your work to know, oh yeah, I'm doing a good job. It's very hard to know that, particularly if you don't have, let's say, a manager that's telling you how you're doing a good job. Which at Propeller, I didn't have that, for instance. On the head of engineering side, I think the main thing that changed is thinking strategically, right? That's ultimately the game when you become a leader, is moving from the, hey, let's do this now because now is now and we need to ship this thing, and what's the best way to do it, the fastest way we can to get the most customer value, to being much more broad in thinking about what are we doing today that'll set us up for 12 months in future or 24 months in future? How will the work that I'm doing ultimately affect other teams across the company, right? Whether that's sales or go-to-market or operations or people team. It's just, much more broader, holistic thinking, which from my experience in running startups, I think that's what gave me advantage or head start in that mindset, right? I think it's much harder to get that and hit the ground running with that stuff. I fortunately had the experience before.
And what would you have done differently if you could turn back time and do that transition again?
If I could turn back time and do that transition again, I think I did it at the right time. I did do it at the right time. I definitely made some mistakes when I started. They were little mistakes, some little mistakes that obviously I wouldn't make again, to some people mistakes that, like, essentially I've learnt my lesson. It's a high friction move for someone to join a company and move into these leadership roles when people who have been at the company for a while haven't moved into those leadership roles, like those type of situations. Yeah. I think that's probably my biggest reflection on things that I would change. But saying that, I don't think it's always going to be hard, right? Like, particularly those transitions are always going to be hard. It's more little things I think I'd change.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And how do you effectively go about keeping your eye and sort of having conversations with the engineers at a certain level?
Yes, yeah.
And then being able to step back.
Great question. So this is actually something that I'm currently struggling with.
Okay.
Right? So the aim of the game is you don't want to become a ivory tower dictator, right? Whereby you have to rely on your team to tell you what's happening rather than being it. So essentially it's like the practice is trust but verify everything, right? So you trust your team to make the right decisions, but you have to make capacity for yourself that if something doesn't smell right or something doesn't look right, you can jump down or parachute into a team and kind of figure it out what's not right. Now, that was easy in the earlier days. Let's say when we're about 20 engineers, we had less engineering managers at that time. Let's say about 3 to 4 engineering managers. It's very easy for me to get in the weeds all the time, right? And I love getting in the weeds. That's like my biggest passion, is being able to work with the engineers to plot a course of how to build a product or how to plan a release or like design a solution that solves a customer's need. That's actually what I really enjoy doing. As the team grows, you, by very nature, have to put in extra layers of management. It's just kind of what you do. And that time with more people that I manage essentially eats into my capacity to do the parachuting into teams. So that is overall a negative effect. And I think, like, essentially over the last 6 months or so, I moved into the role of CTO, and I absorbed a lot more reports in the product space, and it really reduced my capacity to be able to spend the time with the engineers, because I think that's so important for me to essentially cut through the bullshit of hierarchy and things like that, and to help them through their problems and to genuinely understand their problems. And at the moment, I'm going through the transition of trying to reduce my direct report setup, appropriate leadership structures such that I can have this dedicated time to sit down with the team and actually listen to them, hear their problems, help them work through it, those type of things. Okay,
and was that a realisation that you had, or was that something that the company brought up? And not only that, how do you know, or what sort of signs should you look for when you should take a step back?
Take a step back? Yeah. So it's not a novel thing. Essentially, if you talk to any leader at scale, right, they'll say essentially the same thing. And I think it's a major culture difference between, let's say, the old school companies and more of the flat structures. Flat structure does not mean it's only you managing a team of 100 people and there's no other managers, right? It's a flat structure is you being able to go down into the teams and vibe with them on a personal level, work with them on a personal level, and help them through their challenges without being seen as, this person, right? Yeah. So because of that, essentially the other teams at Propeller have all gone through the same problem. Our CEO Rory, for instance, has also gone through this, right? As the company scaled, he's need to implement and practice this trust and verify approach. So I had some good mentors from that side. Now, how do I know how do I know that I need to do it now more than ever? There are essentially, signals that come through, whether that's product decisions that hit production that you haven't seen and you would approach differently or do differently. Like that's honestly for me a really big, let's say, yellow red flag. Like if I see something hit production and it's not a way that I would have approached the problem or solved the problem, that means that I haven't coached my managers enough to represent me in those conversations. So I think that's probably the easiest way for me to be like, if I know I would have approached this feature or build in a lower risk, more agile, faster way or something like that, and I could see as we were scaling and I absorbed these reports, that stuff actually increased, right? So I was starting to see more of that because I was more decoupled from the day-to-day of building product. That was a really kind of clear signal for me to get back in the detail again.
Yeah, no, interesting. That's a really good answer.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, I read an article a few days ago, Financial Review, talking about dual career paths. Now, I'm sure some listeners have heard about this before, but I'm sure some people haven't. I noticed that you guys implemented that 2 years ago. What is dual? How do you see? How would you best describe sort of dual careers? And why did you implement it? And what results have you seen?
So I talked about before, like when I joined Propeller, and this is every startup experiences this. It's essentially your engineers with the most tenure, so who have been at the company the longest, usually the founding engineers, right? Whether that's the first 2 or 3 or 4 engineers, become managers, right? Not because they want to, just because that's pretty natural if you think about it, right? As you start to hire engineers, somebody's got to manage them. Who's best to manage them but the people that have been there the longest.
And they know the business inside
And they know
out.
the business. Exactly. Now, the problem is it takes a certain care and passion and skill set from an individual to be a manager, right? So what about the people that, let's say, really like coding, really like solving technical problems only and maybe coaching others on how to solve technical problems, but don't really have that much enthusiasm for the other manager aspects, right? Whether that's the day-to-day manager bits in terms of the administration of it, running one-on-ones, or whether that's the more career support guidance bits and pieces like that. What I'm seeing is it does take, it doesn't have to be 2 different kind of mindsets, but some individuals do have a very technical focus and they want to, let's say, maybe improve their technical skills and only their technical skills, and that's what they really have a passion for, and others who want to be better at supporting individuals, and that's what their passion is for. So if you have somebody whose passion is technical and you put them in a management role, I'm sure you can put 2 and 2 together. That's obviously not the best fit for the people that they manage, right? Because they will spend less time caring for them. They won't support them as much through their career development and bits and pieces like that. Again, not because they don't care about the individual, but it's just not a passion for them, right? It's not their focus in life, let's say. So what the dual career track is, and this is not novel, like a lot of companies implemented this, and it's not just an engineering thing either, and I'll give you a few analogs in a second to other much bigger companies that have done it, is being able to implement a career path or a track that allows an individual to stay technically focused and continue to advance in whether that's the remuneration on their role or in responsibilities in the company without having to directly manage individuals, right? So the other track is the management track, which is pretty clear cut. Essentially, that's managing people, and the more advanced or the more you go up that track, you manage more people, and then maybe you manage managers of managers, so on and so forth. So in the technical track, what it allows people to do then, it's still leadership. Everybody has to do leadership when you reach a certain skill level, right? Because in order to make an impact at a company, you need to touch more individuals in terms of getting the message out or understanding their concerns and context and things like that. But you don't have to manage people as day-to-day. So for instance, what we did at Propeller was introduce the quite standard now, I think, technical track, which moves through senior engineer to staff engineer to senior staff engineer through to principal, and the engineering manager track, which goes engineering manager, senior engineering manager, in future maybe director of engineering, things like that. And that allows people to choose, right? So when I became head of engineering, we actually made some changes. So people who were previously manager, we moved across to technical track and vice versa, just because that was a better fit. And now what's quite exciting is when people join Propeller is as part of the onboarding, we're like, hey, and this is your career advancement opportunities. And they're like, excellent, because I thought that I needed to become a manager to essentially progress in my career, or vice versa. I thought I needed to only program to advance in my career, right? And it really gives that flexibility, and you're never locked into anything either, right? There has been times where managers have chosen to be like, you know what, it's not really for me anymore. I'm going to switch back to technical track. Yeah, that's basically it at a high level, and it's shown. So we've had it now for 2 years. It's worked. It's scaled. Like it's kind of proof is in the pudding. People on the technical track are pretty happy. I think the thing we're struggling with is as people really advance on that technical track in terms of staff engineer and beyond, it's like figuring out what they can do, right? For lack of a better word, because it is, again, beyond that, you're not managing people, but you're still managing people because you're coaching entire swathes of teams and getting them on side of your ideas and bringing context. So there's still a lot of that stuff, but
it's quite a lot. It sounds like there's quite a lot of leadership.
Heaps of leadership
on the technical side.
Leadership on both.
But I think whereas most people think, oh, it's just technical, but they have to get the buy-in.
Of course,
they have to coach.
Yeah.
They have the vision of the business.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
So I think that's pretty cool. And I see Telstra, one of the bigger
lot of companies have now.
That have done that, and Rolls-Royce as well.
Yeah, easy. It's not really an analog to the startup world, but even New South Wales government has actually done that now because the technical pay grades capped out, and the only way to get more money was to become a director, like a manager. And now even government is starting to recognise the fact that, hey, we don't want to lose our technical expertise and talent to manager positions. We should have some sort of technical track that gets them on the same pay scale, so they can make more impact and stay with the company.
Yeah, and for the engineers that are listening as well, I speak to a lot of engineers that really start panicking about this when they become a senior engineer, but I don't feel like you should. I feel like you should just crack on, keep doing what you're doing, because you can transition from tech to leadership. Of
course.
And if it doesn't work, like you said, try people leadership. That's not for you. Transition over. Yeah. I think the problem that you can find yourself in is if you go too far up that leadership route on the people side, and then go, this isn't for me.
It's harder
to come back. So I think get to the point where you're going to step up, go into one direction where you think you're best suited and where your team thinks you're best suited. Yeah. Try that. It doesn't work, transition, but you've got to move early, would you say? When I say early, I mean if it's not right.
Correct. Yeah, it gets much harder to move as you get more up the managerial track because you just don't program as much, right? That's basically it. So it's very hard to switch back across. But what I have seen people do is there's also this like architect kind of hat, and I see a lot of senior engineering managers moving more into that space because even though you're not programming on a day-to-day, you still have all the qualities that it takes to be that role. So that's also I've found people switch and transition from that. But again, it all just depends on the company you work at mostly, to be honest. And as you said, if you can get a taste for management and you don't like it, don't stay there because you think you have to stay there. I would absolutely recommend switching back across.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. How do you keep up to the latest with tech? Because if you're sort of involved in a lot of the strategy, you're doing a lot of management. Yeah. Like I know I speak to a lot of leaders, they've got side projects that they're doing to stay on track. Yeah. Is that what you're doing, or is there something else that you do to try and make sure you can have them conversations and keeping up to date?
Yeah. So like I think for me, I used to do the side projects and things. Honestly, now I play a lot of music, so my music side has kind of crept into all spare capacity that I have. So I don't do a lot of those side projects anymore. I read a lot, right? So I commute, and on the commute, so I essentially am trying to keep up to date with all the tech, quite broad technology. So whether that's really low level stuff in terms of like new libraries or new languages that are coming out, I like to dabble in that, all the way up to, let's say, AWS releases a new service. I love being on top of that. Honestly, the easiest way to solve this, which is kind of the way we've done it, is we just have a shared tech channel at work called Tech Links in Slack.
Oh, cool.
And when something novel comes out, a few individuals kind of stay on top of it with the Hacker News blog type stuff, and they just share links in there. And that's honestly probably all we need as a company at Propeller, is like, if I just follow along that channel, I look at a few digests, I can stay up to date that way.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right then. Now, probably a question that I'd like to get your thoughts on.
Mm-hmm.
If there was an engineer listening today that thought, you know what, I really like this guy. I think he knows what he's talking about, and he does a bit of music, and I like a bit of music. And I want to really join this business.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of competition out there, and I know you're between sort of software and hardware, but more just as an engineer in general. What makes an exceptional engineer stand out from the crowd?
Yeah. So,
in your opinion,
it's a great question. I, at Propeller, make sure I interview every engineer that joins Propeller, right? So I essentially have a conversation with everyone that joins the team. And there is certain qualities that I'm looking for, and it's less on the technical skills side, if I'm being completely honest, right? Like, we have technical tests, and they can vet you whether you can program and, you know, what a for loop is and those type of things. I don't look for that. What I'm looking for is, if you've worked in previous companies, it's caring about the business and the customer from a wider sense of just doing your job, right? So do you understand what the business is trying to solve? Do you care about the customer success team? Do you care about the finances? Do you have a bit of knowledge and awareness and context of that? I like to put this down to like startup mentality, right? Like, essentially, the qualities that I'm looking for are the qualities that you get if you found a startup, or if you're an early stage startup member. It doesn't mean you have to be in a startup or found a startup, right? But it's caring about the broader picture, understanding the customer, knowing how to use technology to solve a customer problem. It doesn't matter what the customer problem is. They're the type of qualities that I'm actually looking for in an individual. Yeah, not just like focused on the job, get the job done. It's like, hey, how can you join Propeller to add value, not as just an engineer that writes code, but an engineer that can contribute to product decisions, that can understand the customer, that cares about the finance team, the customer team, the sales team, like that broader picture thinking.
So a lot of EQ as well.
A lot of EQ, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of engineers do get caught up with how technically strong they are, but the more and more leaders I speak to, it actually becomes second best.
It becomes,
personality, communication skills, like you said, then being able to collaborate with the team. Having a bit of confidence.
Confidence.
Everyone can have confidence in different ways. It doesn't mean you've got to be the loudest in the room. Just confidence and, believing in yourself, where that can sort of can go across the room and people can feel that as well.
Correct,
So I think that's really interesting. And honestly, the more leaders I speak to, and when I tell the engineers, it's a lot of the time it's what they don't want to hear. But it is what it is. And again, it depends on the different environments. If you're at a bigger environment, then technical abilities probably is number one.
Because you're more narrow. Right? Like it's quite natural. But I like the confidence and the enthusiasm. Like, if somebody's enthusiastic in an interview about their current company or about opportunity to join another company, that's like such a good flag for me. Like, positive energy, joining a company, influence and inspire others. Like, that's so important.
Yeah. And we'll probably touch on this last bit then of the show. Is obviously you're wearing a few different hats at the minute, and as a CTO you're going to be wearing different hats, but you're across the product and the engineering side. Maybe give us a bit of is that a difficult transition in itself to jump between the two? And if it is, how do you effectively manage your time?
It's so I basically joined. I was an engineer at Propeller for 12 months, and then I was head of engineering for 2 years-ish, and then I moved into this role. So across that 2 years as head of engineering, I spent a lot of time on leadership coaching of the team, right? And I know a lot of other leaders say this, but really what you're trying to do as a leader is make the team run itself, and you can be very hands-off, right?
Yeah.
It's essentially empower all the people, delegate all the responsibilities and the ownership onto certain individuals such that they can kind of do the job for you. So fortunately, I've spent a lot of my time before my current CTO role setting up for that. So that meant when the time came and I had to and I took on the product team, very different team, right? It's very different to run an engineering team, whether that's delivery or the operation side of engineering, keeping the platform running and things like that. Very different world to outward-facing discovery of a product team. Different only in, I guess, the type of work they do, but running a team is very translatable, right? It doesn't matter if it's an operations team, if it's a team that scans documents into a computer system at a bank. It doesn't really matter. There's certain elements and qualities of how you structure a team, how you engage the team, how you make it feel like a team that translates across different domains of functions. So when I took on the product team, essentially a lot of the time was spent making it feel more like a team, right? But before I stepped in, it was a little bit more chaotic, for lack of a better word. They didn't have as much structure around things, which works until you hit a certain point. And we'd hit that point. We're at about 10 people in the product team or so. And at that point, you kind of need a bit more structure. So a lot of my time has been spent, I would say, over the last 6 months. And I've got some great team members that I work with in product operations and things like that we've really helped increase the quality of the structure around the product teams. What that means, though, is yes, I've neglected engineering more as a result of it, but it's okay. And now, as we look into this next phase of growth, essentially those future leaders that I've been kind of coaching and working with in the last couple of years have really moved into this role of running the engineering team. So I've got a senior engineering manager there now that kind of runs all the people side of the engineers and the operation side. And I've also moved into I've got an architect now that I work with that essentially runs all that technical strategy and technical vision work. So again, through kind of the work I've done over those years, I've been able to set it up such that I can take more of a back seat and focus on essentially the bigger problems of the business, which was the product team.
Nice. Interesting. I feel like you knew what questions I was going to ask because your answers have been pretty smooth.
Yeah, expert. Yeah.
And just on that,
yeah,
because the way I would see that, when people grow, when they're not, obviously not being micromanaged, but when there's room to move into.
Room to move, yeah.
I think when you shift slightly over to the product side, when you've got no choice but to step up and there's no one, there is someone there, but
Absolutely.
there's no one there.
Yeah.
You sort of have to just do it and you start learning and building yourself up that way.
Correct.
So is that another benefit of wearing across that product and engineering side?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what I like doing, this is my approach to forcing people to step up, right? That was a very rude way to say it, right? But basically creating the opportunity for them to step up is actually just dropping things, right? So if there's a task that's semi-important that probably needs to get done, and it would be great if somebody else did it, what I do as a technique, and I actually encourage my managers and various people I coach now to do it, is just let it go, right? Just let it go. Yes, it's going to cause chaos, but what's really important is somebody's actually going to see that chaos and kind of move in and try and mitigate it. So that's exactly what I did with the engineering team. For instance, there was a few areas around the engineering vision, engineering strategy side that thankfully the my team member Kit, who now works in that space, has kind of stepped into and picked up and now has full ownership on that, creating that space for him. But I employ the same kind of drop the ball technique in product world as well. Like if I think role transitions, if somebody's doing a job that I don't think they need to do, I sit down with it and I'm like, hey, just don't even worry about it. Just stop doing that job. If it's important, someone else will pick it up, right? And allows that person then to grow into that role. And it's quite interesting.
No, interesting. Well, Jacob, I feel like we could speak sort of all day about this, but maybe we'll do it again some other time. Maybe at one of your gigs. I'll turn up and see hear a bit more about the voice.
Yeah.
Unless you want to give us a bit of a
no. Absolutely not. Yeah.
No, well, look, on a serious note, I've learnt a lot there myself.
Great.
Listening to you, and I've had some really inspiring leaders in front of me, so appreciate your time. And yeah, it sounds like you're onto something. You're a smart bloke, and I think you're doing all the right things, and it sounds like you're just getting started, to be honest with you as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on the show, really appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Perfect, thanks very much.